Good evening and a very warm welcome to you. We're back again with another episode of Designing Cities for All, our 2-year-long research and activities program in which we take a deep dive in designing products, places and systems for all. This livecast today is a part of a series of 3 livecasts called Hacking the City, co-curated by Designing Cities for All fellow Galit Ariel, who's also here tonight. And Galit wants to try evoke new ways to hack the city for good. And in this first episode, we will talk about the digital identity, the issues with using data and statistics in urban planning and design, and social data for all. Who gets to design the city, who gets to participate, and importantly as well, who doesn't. Galit, are you there?
I am very much there. Here.
You're there and here and everywhere.
Good to there and here and everywhere.
Good to see you and good to hear you. And we've got multiple yous in the background as well, which I can really enjoy. Can you explain to us?
More.
There's more of you, the more, and we like that.
You're everywhere.
Can you explain to us what are we going to expect today and what are we going to discuss in today's program?
Yes. Indeed. So I have like just a 5-slide deck just to, I would say, interpret the ethics and the intention behind this session, starting with the question, the people versus big tech, question mark, why are we versus against the big tech? Are we against the big tech? And the answer is not really, but also yes, we are. And it's a debate that actually started, I was an annoying audience participant. That's actually how I met Lisa Talia in my past. But annoying in the sense that I raised my hand and asked the question in a tech ethics forum in Sweden, saying, well, big tech companies are made of people, right? They are not these invisible entity, mythical creatures that they want us to think that cannot be confronted or debated with or resisted. So why are we not talking to the people working in these entities and treat them like people? And the answer from the people in the forum was, no, it's impossible. Big tech is just too big now. They're too focused on financial gain. It's impossible to debate. We have to do it through regulators or users. And I have to say, I disagreed then, and I still disagree. I really do believe that companies are made by people. And we are seeing actually in the last few years how activists from within and from outside big tech orgs are succeeding to have some sort of a, progression success. It's not a win-win, but Google employees walk out for real change. Existed since 2018. They had 20,000 employees in 50 cities across the globe stage walkout in reaction to a variety of ethical issues from sexual harassment claims and the way they dealt with them, and into actual financial issues such as AI contracts with the U.S. Department of Defense, or building a censored search engine for China. So, there is an effect, and these companies are made by people. And a lot of people like to call them evil, which is ironic, especially in Google's case, don't be evil, original motto. And I don't think they're evil. I think they're human, just like us humans. They're evil in the sense of when we think about the devil. I love this quote of, the devil doesn't come dressed in a red cape and pointed horn. He comes as everything you've ever wished for. And their evilness, let's say, or their misrepresentation of what big tech needs to do is by doing 2 things. One is to give us everything we want, but not necessarily everything we need, and to amplify things to us, telling us this is what we want and this is what we need, and for us to believe them. So I want to make it clear. I don't hate big tech. I don't want to dismantle them per se. I think it's important to have big organizations that can create big strides in technology. I just think they're doing it for the wrong reasons, and I think we're letting them get away with way too many things. And we really have to ask ourselves, this is also on us and the policymakers that are supposed to represent us, what is it that we want technology to do for us?
But there you've got a point which is kind of problematic in that sense, because if you talk about policymakers, we saw that, for example, in America, when the Congress was questioning Facebook, you saw there that the Congress, people of Congress didn't exactly know what the themes are. And in the Netherlands, it's comparable because the details of what big data involves, how it's being used, how it's not accessible, and in which systems they are applied aren't very clear for the policymakers. So they're not able or capable in order to create new policies and new regulations for those organizations, which on one hand represents people, but also represents a system that is very closed off. So my question is, if the policymakers don't know what they're talking about, how can you expect them to create good policy that benefits us all?
I have two questions for you about that. Why don't they know? Whose fault is it? Is it just their own fault? Because all I'm seeing is big tech companies trying to teach kids to code, and yet they're not putting any effort in making policymakers understand what it is they're doing. So I think it's a matter of convenience, first of all. And I think it is deliberate. I think the lingo that is used in big tech is meant to create this facade of, of desirable futures that we don't really understand, because it's an easier way to operate. So if you go to the next slide, for example, when we talk about smart cities, right? First of all, we only see the cities. The cities are becoming smart. I'm like, didn't know cities wanted to elevate their intelligence. What about the people? What about the people? Why are the cities in the center, number one? And of course, it sounds very appealing. Cities want to be smart, but more connected cities with more integrated data is a dream that we have been sold on, because we're told, like, this is what we want, this is the future, this is the best future for us. And nobody's talking about, let's make, a nicer city, a more intelligent community life, a more inclusive. We're talking about smart efficiency. We're talking about systems, computer systems, and not ecosystems. And when we do get to hear about, what it's going to be looking like, it's always paradise, right? This is the promotional image from Sidewalk Lab, Alphabet, Google, urban development project that was selling, that dream of, like, look at this green ecological city with kids flying kites and on the water. Who wouldn't want to live there? Kind of like not highlighting the fact that they will be monitoring the traffic, the human traffic in it, not just the traffic of vehicles. Human traffic, street life will all be monetized. The IP of people walking the street will be harvested just by them being there. That they don't talk about, and this is their flaw.
But isn't that the key? Because everything, it has to be profitable. It has to be profitable in an economic system. The ecosystem that you talk about is a monetary system in that sense. And, can you expect something else from companies? Yes. Because profit is their base.
But you know what else? But profit is also, I can give you a number of companies that are profitable and ethical. It's not a contradiction.
Give us 3 examples of that, because we do need those examples.
Ben and Jerry's. I'm sorry, they make ice cream, wonderful ice cream, and they are very political and they're profitable. Patagonia is making money. Mozilla, is profitable-ish, not as much as Google. The question is, my intention is not to say, like, let's all move into kumbaya communism, kibbutz. I come from Israel. Kibbutz doesn't work. The human nature doesn't let us really be equal. But, all the profit at any cost is not, in my mind, an acceptable vision for the future, because we've tried it and we're living through the effects of it. which is global warming, which is privacy violation, beyond what, 1984, the book even predicted. We are living in that, utopia, which is very dystopian.
It's very dystopian indeed. And the strange thing is, it's not Big Brother who forces us to use those systems. It's ourselves. We ourselves are using those systems and are enabling Big Brother in that sense to invade our lives as well. We do that almost voluntarily. Or is it really?
Almost. Voluntarily, completely. We upload the images. We give away the data. We give our pulse. We give our bio data because we have to. So it's up to us, really. It's first of all up to us. I'm talking right now, hopefully, to an audience. It's up to us to ask these questions of what do we want from the future.
And if you say cities. It's up to us, it's more than you and I. Tonight you've invited two guests. We will talk with those guests about these themes as well. Can you introduce our first guest to us, please?
Indeed. So first guest is Sander van der Waal, and he's from the amazing Vaal Society that everyone in Amsterdam, I hope, should know about if they haven't. And it works in a local and European level to explore inclusive tech practices, and Sander is the research director there, and I'm super happy to have him with us because he's really working within this field from inside out to change the practice of inclusive and democratic and sustainable.
Right. Well, Sander, warm welcome to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Like Galit also said, you're the research director at the Vaal. Can you quickly explain to us what a research director exactly does?
I can, definitely, and thank you for having me. Nice to be part of this program today. Waal is a research institute which researches emergent technology, and specifically also the underlying assumptions. Some of the things that Galit already touched upon are the things that we research. We want to demystify technology and make clear that it is not something that emerges out of thin air, but it's built by people. I quite liked Galit's introduction there. And then we use that knowledge in order to build alternative technology and experiment with them that are based more on public values rather than the commercial values that we know so much from the big tech companies.
What are the public values? Because I can imagine that the public don't know exactly what the values are that they want.
Yeah, fundamentally it's about democratizing technology. So it's about having people decide what technology works for them. So the values that we work from are openness, fairness, and inclusivity in order to build a future which is sustainable. And we built a model which we call the public stack, which we can see on the screen here, which is the way in which we're trying to make clear to people, including policymakers and lawmakers, what is important about technology, because we recognize what Galit also said earlier, that lawmakers and policymakers are not familiar with technology sufficiently in order to make change. And we think
that exactly, but how do you do that? Because I thought it was quite embarrassing to see Congress, the congressman interviewing the Facebook who alerted people. He didn't know what he was talking about.
Yeah, and that's an issue. That's a big issue. Last Monday, we organized an event for MEPs in the European Parliament just before Frances Hogan testified to the European Parliament with a few MEPs who do understand technology, and we want to help them educate their colleagues in Parliament to better understand the impact of technology. And actually, we did that together with a coalition which is called People versus Big Tech. I don't know if people are familiar with that coalition yet, but it's 100 civil society organizations from across Europe who signed a declaration called the People's Declaration that said, actually, we don't want to be subject to the surveillance capitalism. We want a different model.
But that model, everybody's talking about that. If you talk about bringing human values back, what would that look like? Because it's not profit-based, or not only profit-based, because Galit told us that it can be profit-based, but can also be human. Yeah. But what other human values are important if you talk about bringing that back?
Yeah, it is about being focused much more on bringing everyone on board. So designing for all in that sense really means involving everyone in that process.
What does that look like in practice?
It means sitting around the table with people from lots of different backgrounds and hacking away at systems to develop the alternative.
And what kind of influence would they have, and what would that look like?
It means really starting on a local level. This is why the city level is so exciting. So we can't expect European Parliament and national parliaments to do everything. It needs to start from a grassroots movement. And this is what we do in Amsterdam. And it is a lot of work. It is hard work. You want to involve everyone, which means it takes longer. But you get further by doing
But
that.
still, big data is still big data. What is the influence of the human value going to make? What kind of difference does that make?
The difference is that you make sure that when you design the systems together with everyone, that it is more inclusive, it is more
But how can big
sustainable.
data be more inclusive? Because if it's something, it's inclusive. Because it's everybody's data.
It's not everyone's data. So big data by itself is a very abstract term that you
Yeah,
can define
exactly.
in different ways. Often what we see is that the data sets that are available are...
No. I'm not talking about availability and accessibility. It's like what is being harvested is from everybody. So that, in a sense, is inclusive.
Well, first of all, it shouldn't be harvested from everyone, and where it is harvested from everyone, that is a problem in its own right. Often what happens in practice is that data sets are not harvested from everyone or doesn't include everyone's data, and we need different approaches, and we need to start from maybe not big data but small data, start with very specific human examples and try
Like
and move
what?
away from these big data narratives and AI is going to solve the world.
Well, if you
because these are the
isolate it,
narratives
what would
from
that
the big companies.
And what if you isolate it, what would it be like? Or if you break it down in smaller pieces, what would that look like?
Well, the kind of things that we do, for example, is working with citizens near the Tata Steel factory in IJmuiden. We give them sensor kits where they can measure their own air quality data.
Right.
And collectively, with these 200 sensors, we can help those citizens get an understanding of what the air quality is in their own back garden, and give them the collective power in order to make change happen on a local level.
Yeah, I think, and that is very important. There was a broadcast yesterday that dealt with Tata Steel as well. A satirical program, though.
Yeah.
But it was very interesting and very poignant. So I think that could be of great use. Thank you so much for now. Galit, the floor is yours again, because there's another guest who people already saw at the table but wasn't introduced yet. Would you do the honors of introducing our next guest?
Of course. So one of my favorite humans on earth, honestly, Lisa Talia Moretti, which is part of my little nerd squad, and proud to be on it. And she's an award-winning digital sociologist and tech ethics activist. And she's also an associate lecturer in the Institute of Management Studies in Goldsmiths, and a visiting lecturer at Cardiff University in the School of Journalism, PR and Cultural Studies, and currently working at the Ministry of Justice in the UK on projects like the Power of Attorney, which she will present shortly. And she is a wonderful human and really operates within the field of policy making and education in order to decipher what does it all mean for us and how can we affect it.
Great. A warm welcome to you. And that, of course, is Lisa Talia Moretti.
Thank you very much.
A digital sociologist and at the Ministry of Justice in the United Kingdom. Well, the bar was raised. Our expectations are really high now.
I mean, Galit is just so kind. Thank you for such lovely words. And it's really fantastic to be here with you all today. So thank you so much for having me.
And you made it from England, which is a feat in itself. And we're very happy that you did.
Through all the COVID tests and the scans and the barcodes, and I'm here, yes.
Happily, we're very happy that you made it. You've got a small presentation prepared for us.
Yes, I
where you
do.
explain your work. Please take the floor and show us your presentation.
Great, thank you so much. So it's so lovely to be here with you all. I'm going to scooch my chair so that I don't have my back to these lovely people, and I can.
What you
kind
can
of see
do as well,
everyone.
just if you want to sit here so you're in front of the screen, that's really...
I'm okay.
Yeah,
I'm okay.
Right.
This is perfect. Okay, great. Hi. so nice to meet you all today. As these lovely people have said, my name is Talia Moretti. I'm a digital sociologist, and I'm a contractor within the UK government, which sounds like a very unsexy job. But I can tell you it's certainly interesting, and no 2 days are ever the same. So while I'm working at the Ministry of Justice, I'm working on a particular project called Modernizing Lasting Powers of Attorney. It's quite a mouthful, and I realize that not everyone knows about what lasting powers of attorney are. So I'm just going to do a little kind of whistle-stop tour on what the project is and how digital identity kind of fits into this work. And then the kind of big thing that I'd really like to share with everyone today is some of the lessons that I've learned from inclusive service design over the last 15 months of working on this project, and how I think these lessons in inclusive service design can actually be applied to when we're designing more inclusive cities. Not smart cities. I have a real thing about people using this term smart cities.
Why?
So my thing about it is that with technologists, what many technologists try to do is everything needs to be smart, everything needs to be intelligent, everything needs to be autonomous, everything needs to be AI driven. And then we start to apply these different types of technologies to these different systems, and suddenly we come up with these languages. You know, the fridge it can't just be a fridge, it must be a smart fridge.
Yeah.
Can't just have a washing machine, it must be an intelligent washing machine. You have to have, an intelligent dryer. I mean, this is so ridiculous.
But the idea behind it is that it makes life more easy. If you have a smart fridge or a smart washing machine, it makes life more easy.
So I think what's happening is that we are describing the products that we're using as opposed to the value that they can create for society. And I think that's the challenge that I have with some of this language. And, I was just so fascinated about the work that Vaal is doing, and really listening to this idea of bringing people around the table together and actually asking, what do people want from the things that we're designing? Do people even want a smart city? Did anyone wake up and be like, do you know what I want today? I want Amsterdam to be smarter. No, I want Amsterdam to be healthier, more inclusive. I want it to be, more community-centered, more community-driven. These are the things people really want, right?
But do people really know what they want? Because when the mobile phone was introduced, I knew loads of people said, I don't want to be accessible all day, every day. I won't ever have a mobile phone, a cell phone. Lo and behold, within 5 years, everybody had one.
So this is a great segue into the work that I do at the Ministry of Justice, because I work with the public every day. And what I do is I get to speak to the public every single day, and I basically interview them, and I find out what do they want from the service that we're designing. And I can tell you for 100% certainty, people know what they want, because they certainly also know what they don't want. And it's not for people to tell us exactly what the product needs to do, what it needs to look like, how it needs to kind of work, but it is up to them to tell us about the values that they want instilled and imbued within that product, and us as designers and researchers to be able to build those values in a way that is really inclusive and that meets a need that they're telling us that they haven't fulfilled. So to go back to lasting powers of attorney, essentially a lasting power of attorney is a really powerful document within the UK, and it allows you to be able to name a number of different people, so one or more people, who can make decisions on your behalf if you ever lose mental capacity one day. So dementia and Alzheimer's and Parkinson's are some of the fastest growing cognitive disorders in the world. And what a lasting power of attorney does is that if you were ever diagnosed with Parkinson's, dementia, Alzheimer's, it allows you to have this document that people can continue to make decisions on your behalf with regards to your finances, your health, and your welfare, so that you can continue to live a life of comfort and dignity in your old age or in your later years when you no longer have the capacity, the ability to make those decisions. So hugely important document. At the moment, the document is completely paper-based. And you need to print that piece of paper out at the end of the day, you need to sign it, and you need to have witnesses. Now, what we're looking to do is we're looking to introduce a digital channel so that people can not just have to sign this document in a paper format, but that they can actually submit this document digitally to the government, and that we can register it. In order for us to make this big change, to introduce this new channel, what we have to do is we have to change the law. So this is a really big thing because the law was put into place in something like 1867. So there is a lot of legislation behind us that we need to kind of really work through and unpick. And because we need to change the law, we have to go through things like public consultations, and we're working really closely with loads of stakeholders. So these are kind of my lessons over the last 15 months that I wanted to share with everyone. The first thing I wanted to share is that technology is socio-technical, and it is always socio-technical. No matter what you are trying to design, when it comes to technology, meeting people, you have a socio-technical system always. So how do we actually see this emerge within society today? We see it in so many places. We see it in algorithms that are now in charge of going through CVs and determining who gets the job and who does not get the job. You know, we've seen algorithms being introduced into the justice system within the US who determines how many years somebody gets parole and who gets parole and who doesn't get parole, how many years somebody gets sentenced for and who gets sentenced for more or for less. So we start to see this kind of intersection of technology within these different social systems in which we live. What does this mean for designers? This means that when you are designing a product or a service, you have to think about the multiple different social systems that are going to intersect with your technology product. And then what you need to do is you need to bring stakeholders that occupy those current social systems, and you need to bring them on board within your design process. So for the process that we're working on, the service that we're working on at the moment, we're working with different charities because we know that there's loads of people who make a power of attorney who are getting loads of support from different charities like the Alzheimer's Society or Age UK. We're also working with will writers, solicitors, the legal sector in general, but also those who work in banking and finance and the healthcare system, because lasting powers of attorney, when they get used, they're predominantly used in those social circles. And so we know that when we change our service, those services that those different organizations offer are also going to change. So in order to make sure that we design a system that people can use, we want to make sure that we can foster trust by working really closely with those individuals. So we've been really generous with our time, sharing our prototypes, sharing our code with people. We've made sure to bring them on board and to kind of bring them involved within our co-creation workshops to get kind of their feedback about what would this look like in their system. I don't work in the NHS, the National Health Service. I'm not a solicitor. For me to get this right for a solicitor or for a psychiatric nurse, I have to keep them in mind when I'm designing my service. The next big thing to think about when we are designing is that we have to keep in mind that the Earth is one of our biggest stakeholders. All of us know we are in the current climate emergency. COP26 has just happened. And so we need to be mindful that when we are designing products and services, any kind of data storage, any kind of technology that we're running uses power. And electricity and power and water, these are all taxes on the environment. And so when we're designing a product, we need to make sure that we are maintaining a level of awareness for what this is going to do for the environment and make sure that we are treating them with care. The kind of second big thing is a real lesson, or it's a real theme that's already running through today's talk, and that's about inclusivity. Now, a lasting power of attorney, the service I'm working on, is not just for older people who have been diagnosed with dementia. It is for people who live across England and Wales. This is 2 nation-based services. And it's for anyone who has mental capacity currently and is over the age of 18. That is my audience group. It's big. And so what that means is that there is a huge diversity of opinion and a huge diversity of ability, confidence, and need. And it's about really making sure that when you're designing your service, that you have this idea in mind, that you are designing for many different people. And we know that there are tons of different needs in a city, and we need to kind of really take that on board. Now, this is really overwhelming to do when you first start this, and you're like, how do I design for everyone? This is really too much. You need to actually think about who are the most vulnerable 10 or 20% within your audience group. And actually, if you design for the most vulnerable 10 or 20% and you are able to meet those needs, the rest of them, the 80 and the 90%, will be met or automatically. Their needs will automatically be met. You have to, if you design for the most marginal, the most vulnerable member in society, and they can use your product or service, it means pretty much everyone else can use your product and service. So
just have a couple of minutes more.
Yes, no worries. We've got, so some of the things that we have been doing around this is we've been thinking a lot more outside of the box when it comes to identity. We need to stop thinking about passports and driving licenses. We need to think about much more around who do people know? Like, how can we use a social circle, like a social network, to help people identify themselves? What are the products that people have that we can potentially use? And what about using somebody's environment, their social context in which they live? Data rights is a big thing that we're thinking about, and we're all to blame for the total mess that the data ecosystem is at the moment. One of the things and the first ways that we can fix this is through data proportionality, only using the data we need in order to run the service to the highest levels. You do not need all the data in order to run a good service. It's a complete myth, and we need to get away from that. The next thing that we're thinking a lot about is how do we give people the opportunity to own their own data? I do not think that government should be owning all the data that is given to them by citizens, and we should provide an opportunity for people to own their own data back. We've been thinking in our own project about how we do this, and we've been looking at GDPR rights, and we've been translating those GDPR data rights into digital identity principles. So how do we uphold the tenets of consent? How do we give people the right to know more? How do we give people the right to decline? Also the right to ownership and the reuse of their data that's already been verified. So just to close, if you remember nothing else, remember that technology is not a product, it's a system. Remember that digital is just a channel, not the full solution. Provide many opportunities for people to engage. Be proportional. You do not need all the data to run a good service. Think about data rights as design principles. How do you actually not just design for user needs, but user rights? And in order for us to be able to rectify the current imbalances within the data ecosystem, you have to give people the option to own their own data. And so I'm a big fan of the data sovereignty movement. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed that.
Great, thank you so much for that. Loads of themes. Very
Whistle-stop
interesting.
tour.
Whistle-stop tour. Well, very interesting, and there are a lot of topics we can talk about as well. Galit, can I give you the floor first to respond to the presentation that we just saw?
This presentation is exactly why I love Lisa. Lisa Talia Moretti. She is fantastic, and I think she touched on. I want to touch on two very important things that she highlighted. Is first of all, this idea that people don't know what they want until they see it, quote unquote, Steve Jobs, is completely false. First of all, let's start with the fact that Apple did extensive user research. It just sounded very cool for them to look like geniuses. But second of all, we do know what we want. And more than that, we know what we need. And these are not the questions that are asked enough. Are these technologies solving things we need or things we want? And it's great to have things we want, but I think, solving hard problems first, and the way it was illustrated by solving the most vulnerable, the hard problems first, and then, do zero, and then go to Mars, that will be better. And that's a much more human approach, and we're still developing and evolving.
Great. Reaction from you?
No, I think this is great. I can really understand why Galit invited Lisa. This is perfect. And I think in particular, some of the things that Lisa highlighted are quite crucial for us to consider more generally, not just sort of this kind of systems that you're working on, but are quite principles like designing for the most vulnerable. Keep Earth into account. I think we don't do enough yet. This is something that wasn't really in your summary, but I think it's crucial and quite difficult for us to do because we don't know enough about our carbon footprint of the technologies that we use or design. So I think a lot of work needs to be done. Needs to be done for that.
But how can we arrange that to become mainstream and to become that of common practice of the companies that do that? Because you're talking about changing systems, and if we've seen something in the past couple of 2 years, it's very. One hand, it's very easy to change systems on a short term, not for a longer period of time. But we are so used to the old systems that we revert back to them very quickly as well. And what you propose is a fundamental change in the systems that we have. How do we go about it?
I mean, it's a really difficult thing to do. So, there was a question earlier about, why do we have this disconnect between policy and digital and design teams? And, for somebody who is working within government, I can tell you why. It's because they don't work in the same teams. You have a policy team, and then you have a digital team, and you have a data team. They're different teams of people. And sometimes those individuals aren't even in the same building. Sometimes they're in different cities.
Yeah.
And so this is what part of the reason many times that policymakers are not as educated about technology as they should be, because they're not confronted with it in the same way that digital and design teams and data teams are. And so what we need to do is technology needs to be seen as less technical and much more multidisciplinary in order to fix a system. Technologists cannot fix the technology system on their own, and they need to stop trying to do that. There needs to be a real diversity of new roles and job titles that are seen as being contributing to the design of systems. We cannot have even, all data. We cannot have just data engineers or technology architects working on our databases and our algorithms. We need to have anthropologists in there. We need to have sociologists in there.
I think that is a brilliant addition to what should be done, but how do we go about it to get that into practice?
So we need a few really brave companies to really start this process, because what this happens, from a sociological point of view, you need to create new norms. You need to create new social norms of working. And yes, new norms don't kind of just spring up overnight. But what we need to do is we need to have a few organizations who are really brave and who really come forward and show this is how a new way of working can start to go forward. I do think that there are definitely improvements that are already being made. If I look within working within my own team, working within the different teams that I work with, and I chat to some of the people who are part of those different user research teams and service design teams, they come from a really wide variety of digital humanities backgrounds, and just sometimes not even digital, just humanities backgrounds. And so we are seeing more of this change taking place, and organizations like Vaal, who are doing such great work, the Civic AI Lab, which is at University of Amsterdam, who are doing such fantastic work, we start to see that once we start to build some of this pressure from, and more people are adding to that, it does become a bit of a tidal wave, and that does start to be sort of, the tide that lifts all boats, really.
And does it help to form alliances in order to bring that change about?
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen firsthand from my own work that working in a really collaborative way, working in a really participatory way, giving people shared ownership of the work that you're doing. This isn't just my project at the Ministry of Justice. This is part of us working with Age UK and Alzheimer's Society.
But also with companies in order to bring that change about.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And I think by doing that, people suddenly feel this sense of accountability and responsibility. Right. And that's what can start, to bring about that change.
Galit, I would like to give you the floor later to ask your questions in regard to the presentation. But Sandra, I would like to pose to you the following, because what we just heard is that we're responsible for the mess we're in, for the data mess we're in. As a researcher, do you agree with that?
I think partly, yes. I think partly all of us, it sort of brings me back to the quote actually that Galit had earlier about the devil. The devil is all that we want, right? We crave and we respond and we get addicted to the technology that we use. And I think we're partly responsible for that. But on the other hand, we're also being made addicted by the way in which technology is being designed. So it's a two-way system.
And we can't be at least up until now we couldn't foresee what the results would be or how our privacy would be invaded. Now we do, and now we can check. Can we bring about that change, or is it already too late?
No, it's definitely not too late. I would strongly keep arguing until I die that it's never too late for change. I think we should always consider the fact that technology is a socio-technical system. It's been made by humans. It's those people at Google and Facebook who made the systems, and we can bring about change. I mean, the whole technical sort of digital technology is a very young field. If you compare it to something like the food industry, no one questions whether the food is safe that you buy in the shops, because we have all the systems and the legislation built up in order to make sure that you as a consumer, when you go to a shop, what you buy there, you can eat. And there's all sort of legislation about what's on there. We don't have that for technology yet, but we're working on it. And these are all the changes. There's no silver bullet. I think we should question the people, we should also change the legislation, we should also build these sort of cross-collaboration teams, and we should do all of the above in order to make sure that society is fit for the technology. The developments are going way too quick for us to catch up, so there's a lot of work to be done.
But it's an interesting comparison to food, because that has been changed. Well, you know, we were eating for quite a long time, or humanity has been eating for quite a long time before regulation came, and that's a very interesting comparison that you had. Lisa, my final question before I give the floor to Galit is that you mentioned GDPR data rights. What is that exactly?
So GDPR is a set of rules and legislation that came in, I can't quite remember when, but not too long ago, that essentially protects your personal data, right? And it's European-wide. Even though the UK has left the EU, we have adopted GDPR within our own legislation. And it legislates how companies can use your data, and it legislates the fact that that you need to consent to your data being used and your data being processed. Now, this is all wonderful in theory. In practice, it hasn't worked quite so well, right? And part of the reason around that is I think there wasn't enough public education around what GDPR is, but it was also not enough mandation around how GDPR was communicated to people by companies. So what they tend to do is, you know, those cookie banner ads, those cookie things that you get to see, those, do you agree to using cookies? Those have been written so badly and have been written in such legalese that you just don't even know what is actually written there, and you just click OK, right? And that is you consenting to that website to process your data, right? And I think there is GDPR is not perfect. It was a fantastic and amazing piece of legislation that was brought in to protect us, but we need to work on it. Right. And I think there's ways that we can better communicate consent and better communicate what we're going to be doing with data. And the kind of next steps around GDPR that would be fantastic will be returning data to the people whose data it is. Exactly. And so they become joint controllers.
And some companies and some websites even confuse you deliberately, because even to have the right check. It's like, am I checking to allow the company, or am I checking to not allow the company? Yeah. That is so confusing as well.
Do you have legitimate interest on and consent on? Or do you have them both off? Which one protects you? Yeah.
Exactly.
Bastards, a lot of them. Yeah.
Galit, I would like to give you the floor to respond, or I have questions for either of our guests.
So I have a couple of questions, but I first want to chime on what these wonderful humans have stated. So first of all, to go back into can we or can we not change? Of course we can change. We can change it today. We can change it yesterday. You know, when COVID started, you know, world leaders said, we cannot possibly shut down global aviation. And look, we can do all these things if we want to. And this is the problem. We just choose not to. This is the honest truth. And we choose not to. And I love to quote Sandy Pentland when he says, we could solve the world hunger today if we wanted to. And this is, again, because we're following our social values now about what we want versus what we really need are diverted. And this is a cultural shift that we have to start with, you know, with the people, because all these companies that are capitalist, money-making companies need our money and need our data. So when we start boycotting them, and when we start, you know, demanding better ethics and practices, they listen. And we saw it with fashion, we saw it with food. When we do demand ethical measures, they come. They just don't have to, so they choose not to. And that's their ethical problem. And again, legislators are not making them, so that's another layer. But we can do it if we want to, and this is where it starts. But I want to ask the esteemed guests a couple of questions, specifically about cities and how do we deal with that within urban environments. So the first question, you know, as smart, I also don't like smart cities so much. Smart or better cities are being designed or envisioned, how can we indeed convert public digital spaces or public spaces that have digital means integrated into them be better? That's the first question. I have two more if we have time. But that's number one.
Lisa, would you like to
How
respond?
do we make it better in cities?
So I think my first thing that I would say is I would want to come back to that sort of collaborative co-design piece of work. And I think in cities, we all have an ownership over our cities and over the spaces that we live in, and we all want to take pride in where we live. And in order to evolve where we live, we need to have a say. And very often things are done to us and not with us. And so that would be my first thing that I would say, like, how do we make these public spaces better? How do we integrate digital technology into public spaces? And how do we do that successfully? The first thing is to ask people how they would like that done. You know, how do they kind of see technology enhancing the space, you know, that they currently live in? How could they see their space as an improvement? Or, you know, what would they like their space to become? And I think there are lots of different research methodologies that allow us to be able to engage in a really interesting way, that allow for people to feel that the engagement in technology isn't such a scary thing for them, that you don't have to work in technology to be able to have these conversations. And I think it's up to researchers and people like Sander and I to create research methodologies that allow for people to come into that space and not just be research participants, but actually like co-creators of the research and co-designers within the research. So that's my first thing. I'm going to stop there and hand over to you. Yeah.
No, I think it's great. The kind of thing that we do in Amsterdam is to work with the local libraries. I think that's an interesting example of how we try and have young people in the local libraries in Amsterdam through what we call maker education, be sort of hands-on involved in creating things. And that helps people from a young age sort of understand that they are able to do things themselves. And I think that's where it starts. I also think that from our politicians on a local level, we need to demand better. So Amsterdam is part of the city's Coalition for Digital Rights. There's about 50 cities globally who signed up to that. And it's a nice and lofty manifesto of how human rights and public values are being respected in the way in which technology is being deployed in the city. But next step is to hold them to those standards, because in fact, even the city of Amsterdam, which is doing relatively well compared to some other cities, are also in different projects sort of trampling on human rights in the city at the same time, and take part in experiments where the public is being surveyed, for example, in ways that are not really in line with the types of values that they say are important to them. So I think that's part of it as well. And lastly, I think it's also important to consider what you mentioned earlier, Lisa, about digital being a channel and not a replacement. What we see again with the local library here in Amsterdam is that they try and move to digital systems to replace other systems, which leaves a lot of people out. So when you design for the vulnerable, that means that needing to work an iPad in order to sign up to the library card is not an option to them. So you need to always be able to provide alternative systems for people, and technology is never a full replacement.
No, it's a means, and that's a very interesting insight that I got today. That changes your perception of technology as the solution of all things, and that's how it's being presented as well. Galit, any other questions? No, let's
Yes.
start. Are you satisfied with the answer then?
I am always satisfied with these answers, and I support. And first of all, Lisa, I did notice you didn't include me in your little plan, but okay, we'll talk about it later. It's just you and Sander solving problems, whatever. But we're not judging you. But
Would you like to respond to that?
Galit, you know that I'm always including you.
Are you though? No, sorry, it's just a banter because I do love Lisa. But I had like one more question, and it's a bit of a tricky one because I don't believe in Utopia, and I don't believe I don't believe in Dystopia, and I don't believe with Utopia. They are both hypothetical situations that we can never achieve, and we always get the mix, the heterotopia in between. But if you were to describe to us what is a utopian future city and a dystopian future city in terms of technology, what would it look like? Worst case and best case scenario.
I'm going to hand over to you
See,
first.
that's what happens when you don't include me.
The camera was on you.
The camera's on you, so
Right. So, okay. So my kind of dystopian, I'm going to start with the bad stuff. So I think a dystopian city is one where you are, one where you are watched all the time and where you lose that kind of special sense of anonymity that you gain within a city. I think a bad version of a city is where technology encroaches on your life as opposed to enhances on your life, where technology makes things more difficult for you as opposed to easier for you, where technology impacts upon your physical and your emotional and your mental state, and it feels draining as opposed to enriching and energizing. And overall, that technology becomes this kind of really oppressive force that works against you rather than for you.
are we there already? For some groups, maybe.
As somebody who works in the UK government, I'm going to I'm going to sidestep that question. I think there are some countries in the world where you may find that a dystopian model of technology is currently existing.
Can you give examples of those countries?
No.
We'll talk in the bar.
Can I do that?
Yeah, sure, Galit,
do
please
that?
do that. Please
It
do.
starts with a C. I think we're actually seeing these totalitarian environments on different levels, both in totalitarian regimes and also totalitarian, I want to say democracies. So I think, I can tell you that in my mind, love London, but again, CCTV that was introduced there in the 90s is everywhere, so you are being surveyed and watched already, and it's not new. New York, China, there it's actively integrated into policing systems. But even wonderful cities like Singapore that during COVID had robots, the Boston Dynamics robo dogs, going and making sure that people, don't breach the COVID systems. If you can claim it's effective and it's working and it's reducing crime, but when we talk about dystopia and control and policing via algorithms and via surveillance systems, that is there.
Thank you. That was the dystopian scenario.
Yeah,
Can you give us a utopian scenario?
Absolutely. So I think a utopian scenario is where technology exists to enhance your life, and technology is designed in a privacy preserving way. And now, when I say a privacy preserving way, not every citizen can own ultimate privacy, right? There are certain things where you have to let the government know who you are, what you're doing in order to gain access to certain government services, right? So this kind of idea of an all privacy is not possible and has never been possible within a society, right? There's always a certain amount of public and private that everyone is always negotiating throughout their lives. But what I mean by privacy preserving technology is that it's respectful of the amounts of personal data it requires from you in order to give you a really great experience. I don't think I designed a sticker, it was in the presentation, and it says you don't need all the data. And I feel really strongly about that. And so I think that would be part of my utopia. Another part of my utopia is where technology is being run using sustainable energy. So I think it's something that we don't talk enough about. It's something that it's a really kind of dirty secret within the technology industry about how taxing it is for the environment, and just how filthy really it is. When you think about like the supply chain, the precious metals, all that kind of like human labor that's used. And so I think my utopia would be that we get closer to fixing that kind of logistics and supply chain in the technology industry.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. Sander.
I wish I'd go first now. This is perfect. It's almost like nothing to add. No, I think in a utopian version for me, It is a bit similar to what Lisa said, but it is about allowing humans to be humans, and to make sure that we put that humane version of technology first, to make sure it's there for us to connect and to do what we think is important to us, not because we're driven to it by addictive forces or dark patterns. We haven't talked about dark patterns much, but that's I think quite a core feature of what has gone wrong with design in terms of technology.
But can you talk about dark patterns? What are those?
So dark patterns are all the different ways in which technology is luring you into doing something which you may or may not consciously want to do, which ranges from that sort of big green button next to that red small button to suggest which ones you need to click, but also other ways in which notifications keep popping up, or YouTube suggesting you the next video and then the next and the next video, which is even more emotional and gets you into a different state. So one of the discussions right now in legislation in Europe is whether or not dark patterns can be prohibited. So are there ways in which we can ensure that we're not moving into this dystopian future where you are being nudged and lured into different directions, which for me is the dystopian city, that you're always being bombarded and influenced by doing things that you do not want from yourself.
Right.
And can we move into more humane technology where actually you do have a choice, and it is about you and what is important to you as a person and as a human being?
And how is that being developed, or how can that be developed?
There are some alternative guidelines from the Center of Humane Technology, for example, Tristan Harris. I'd recommend sort of watching his videos and following his work, which is really interesting. He used to work at YouTube, by the way, so he knew the dark patterns and tried to flip that around. And lots of other researchers are working on these alternative technologies where you are actually in control. But it also means to change the types of business models. So for me, a dystopian city also means that there are commercial companies with commercial motives influencing the way in which the city is being designed. And this is a lot of what we've got right now. The whole smart city narrative, I agree with both these other speakers that smart city is not the way to go. It's a marketing trick.
Yeah.
It's a marketing story that they're trying to sell us. But it's not in our interest to go to that direction.
Well, thank you so much. Time is racing by. We're in the final 3 minutes of this conversation. Galit, yeah, I know, but we still have 2 more episodes left with you. Can you tell us more about what we can expect in the next 2 episodes, please?
Well, more conversations, more nerds, more criticism. But in the next episode is really going to talk about connectedhood and really the sense of community, and how do we stop gentrification, technology-fueled gentrification, in favor of really helping communities and cultures thrive in the city. And I have a wonderful DJ/PhD, PhDer, Neil Livingstone, that will come and will be a co-host, and we'll play some music as well. And we're going to talk about Black culture and Rastafari culture and cities and Toronto and the Netherlands, and it's going to be awesome. And in the third episode, we're really going to work and talk about how art and culture can actively hack cities into creating them more humane and more, I want to say, less technology driven and more as technology served.
Right. Technology served, less technology driven. Very, very nice. Is there a final question that you would like to pose to our guest before we say goodbye?
When are we going to sit together? And no, I want to ask one question, which is, what is the thing you want most? Like, if I were a genie that could give you anything you want to fix cities of the future, and I'm not, I kind of am, but I'm not. But if I could give you anything today, what is the first thing you would want to wake up tomorrow and have what in order to make cities better for all of us?
I think that, to be fair, we should start with you.
It's a good question. I think, what would I want if I would wake up tomorrow? I look forward to just getting to work with everyone to build the city that is for all of us. So I'd like time to be able to work with everyone on that, and bring everyone around the table, make sure get COVID out of the way, and get together in person and build the city that is for us all.
Great, thank you so much. Lisa.
I think I would want a real desire for change from big tech. That would be my big dream. I would want them to wake up tomorrow and say, right, we're actually doing this. We're actually coming to the table, and we want to change. There's
nothing for us in Mars. There's no oxygen there either. So why don't we fix Earth?
Well, thank you so much for that. Thank you to all speakers. Thank you, Galit. Don't go away, because we've got 10 minutes here where we can talk with the audience that is live here about several other subjects. Like Galit said, in the next episode, the theme is digital gentrification and connecthood, and we will talk about the cultural and personal costs of digital gentrification. That is a tongue twister that I'm going to practice. And we also will talk about the effect of check on the organic and uncoordinated intimacies between people, spaces, and places. If you would like to have more information about designing cities for all, please go to our website, dezwijger.nl/DCFA. And if you would like to make a financial contribution in these dire times, that is more than welcome. More information about that you can find at dezwijger.nl/pay. And that every contribution that you leave will benefit the programs directly. Thank you so much for joining us online. Thank you so much for joining us here live. We will continue the conversation, and hopefully we'll see you online next time again. Have a great night, and see you next time. Bye-bye.